about obviously what we do at stock restaurants. Testing 1, 2.
What did that strike you in your evolve?
So Tony, another really hot topic in the restaurant industry and probably in the world altogether is waste. Food waste, obviously utility waste. Any way that we can get the most efficiency and bang for your buck is always going to be a hot topic.
That is the business, right? Like taking food, making it into something, and serving it to people, not having it end up in the garbage.
Of course,
right.
Of course. I remember one of the most important steps we took in some of the former operations that I was involved in was starting to count how much bread we were baking off. And I remember this specifically because we were making Red Lobster inspired cheddar chive biscuits. The thing is it's not until you really dive into those numbers that you start to realize, okay, we're only buying buttermilk for this one item, right? And then how much cheddar cheese and how much butter are going in to the, to the...
Essentially a free item, right?
Right, an item that you're not making any money on, right?
It's part of the restaurant experience, there's no charge for it, but it's got to work itself out somewhere.
That's correct. What we did was, of course, figure out based off of each of the item costs, what's our recipe cost on this huge batch of biscuits, and then what's the yield, right? How many biscuits are we getting out of this batch? And we were shocked that each biscuit that went out to the table was costing over 50 cents.
It doesn't even include labor.
Right, and you haven't even gotten to include labor, right? And the automatic assumption, the throwaway idea is that if it's baked or if it's a pastry item or whatever, that it just doesn't cost that much.
If it comes in a basket and goes in the middle of the table, it's...
Right. And long story short, we then started to, we did like a par sheet, and at the end of the night, because you had to freshly bake off these biscuits and they're good for that half hour after they come out of the oven, we started to write down how many we were throwing out at the end of the night. And it actually, $10 a day.
When you describe a financial cost to that,
it completely changes, right? $10 a day, $20 a day, $100 a day starts to really add up. And so in general, this idea of waste is something we all try to avoid.
Sure.
Right? But what are some things, can you remember like any kind of ways that you, in your old back of the house days, would try to either cross-utilize products or figure out best
ultimately,
uses?
If something's left over or you've ordered too much, I think restaurant waste and food waste in restaurants is a very hard thing to accomplish, because if you have too much waste, you don't have a restaurant.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. There's no sustainability.
You can see it happening. You can see it going in the garbage because it's not going on a plate into the dining room.
Right.
Where it becomes more interesting is like, are you utilizing some of these things that you may not have used before?
Stems.
Broccoli stems, for example. Like whittling those down and adding them to a dish. For example, we'd use the salmon bellies, right? Make those into a different dish instead of put that little salmon belly onto the plate. We'd take off the salmon bellies, cure them, smoke them, and do like kind of a salmon jerky in a way. That
interesting. And was it like a garnish on like a dish or something?
Yeah, at the garnish or at the bar or on an hors d'oeuvre or something like that allows it to utilize it as on a different menu item or giveaway, even than just kind of going into the garbage.
One of the things that I always thought was so interesting about your perspective on day-to-day back office or back of house operations and just food costs in general is the idea that an engaged leadership team was like the first line of defense. And you would always use the example of salmon, right? So my food cost, for example, on fish is high, and we determined that based on the number of salmon dishes we sold, and the cost of this cumulative amount of salmon that we brought in for the month is much higher this month. And I remember you would always say, well, yeah, of course, if you've got a new person that's breaking down fish, or if you've got team members that aren't actively engaged in getting the most yield out of the side of the belly, that you need an engaged operator, a chef that's paying attention to say, hey, there's no reason to cut 6 inches off of each side to have this incredibly perfectly, 4 inches.
So there's the idea of waste, right, which is stuff going into the garbage, and there's an idea of you're cutting too big of portions to go on the plate, so that's not necessarily a direct waste. It's being eaten, but it's not figured into your food cost.
Right, or the idea that, like, I remember in the steakhouse days, there were some butchers that were incredibly good at making sure that they got uniform, beautiful, 2-inch thick, 8-ounce filet mignons, right? And then they would take the ends, save them, cryovac them, put it together, and actively let chef know, hey, I've got 20 pounds of end pieces. Do you want to run a tartare special? Do you want to, do a carpaccio? Or should we grind them up in the burger? Do you want me to throw it in staff meal?
Could be family meal, exactly. It could be staff meal, but as long as it's being utilized properly, there's nothing really should be going to waste in a restaurant.
I think some tips that you could always, kind of lean on to ensure that you're getting the most out of your food is, one, are the people who are prepping and portioning out these items, like you said, are they ensuring that they're getting the proper portion size, right? 6-ounce filet or a 6-ounce piece of halibut that turns into 8 ounces can very quickly get out of hand, especially if you're serving 50 halibuts every night.
Sure, then your diners also get used to that size of a portion, right?
I honestly, one of my favorite restaurants in Florida is this great fish spot, and I see wildly varying portion sizes. I get really happy when I order the blackened grouper and it's like, oh my gosh, it's like 10 ounces.
You gotta figure out when that butcher is working.
I
like,
know.
Is that on Wednesdays or Saturdays, right?
And then there's these other times where, like, I'll go in and I order my blackened grouper and it's like a 4-ounce little front piece. And look, it's a great restaurant. I'll go back. I love the food. But you're right. When you get that huge portion
When the food cost
size,
is too high, they ratchet it down, right?
Yes.
When it's comfy, they give you bigger portions to keep you coming back.
Exactly
It
right.
all ends up the same at the end of the day.
Yeah. In general, I think some tips you can lean on to get the most out of your food cost or the most efficient use of your product is keep an eye on the team that's involved with portioning.
Portion control.
right?
Right. I think that the idea of waste not being something that goes into the garbage is important, but that it's actually being served and eaten, but it's too big of a piece that's going on there. Or they're being a little bit too liberal cutting the trim off of it, right?
Right,
That could be more of something that's going into the garbage or being utilized somewhere else, but it could mean you get an extra portion of salmon out of each side.
That's correct.
So that's
and
huge.
one portion out of each side, if you're going through 4 sides of salmon every day, all of a sudden, over a month, it turns out into a lot. So another thing, of course, is keeping an eye on your costs. When invoices come in, one thing I used to love to do was run a report out of my POS, a product mix, see what items were selling the most, and then take a look at that item. Let's say, for example, we used to blow through Pinot Noir in a lot of the restaurants that I used to work in. So I would look at the total number of glasses I sold. I knew that each of those were portioned out at 5 ounces. It was a consistent daily struggle and reinforcement to the team. Hey, make sure that this 5-ounce pour is always being executed, whether it's a service bar or it's a guest at the bar, right? So kind of reinforces what you're saying is keep an eye on what's happening on day-to-day ops. But taking a look at the POS, how much have I sold, then looking at my invoices, all right, how many cases did I buy, backing out the inventory that I took, how much are left on the shelf, and how much did I use, and being able to pinpoint top 10 products to start and have a real idea of what's happening with the costs on each of those top products. And then as you get more sophisticated, being able to give different managers or different leadership team members, like let's say if we had a lead server that wanted to learn how to be a somm, I'd say, all right, look, your responsibility is keep an eye on the sparkling wines. Keep an eye on what's in the fridge. Are there more than one open at the end of the night? Do we need to, proactively?
That gets into in a little bit of an inventory control also.
Absolutely.
You might have stuff in the dry store just been there for 5 years, right? So make sure you're kind of rolling through that stuff a little bit more carefully so that it might not be waste again yet.
Yes.
But if you have number 10 cans of chickpeas, let's get it out and let's get it on a menu item or as a special or something, just so it's not money and inventory sitting on the shelves.
That's correct. Or oops, looks like we're having chickpea stew for staff meal for the next month.
Hey, it's using it up.
I agree, and it's delicious. Just add chorizo. So yeah, in general, there's a lot of ways that you can make sure you get the most use out of your food. I think that one is being engaged in your numbers and your data, making sure you're collecting data properly. A product like ChouxBox or Restaurant 365 or Cogswell or Means is a great way to make sure that your team and the back office is engaged in the actual data of what you're buying. Having a great POS, setting it up properly, ensuring that there is an actual logic to how you're putting these ingredients in.
That's a good point. I mean, special 1, 2, 3 on the buttons really don't give you details on what's being sold, so you can better manage what to purchase, what should have been sold, what should still be in the shelves.
It's huge. The POS and how it's organized and the data that's in the system, it's your Bible, right? I remember often that oysters were such a pain for us.
All the different
types, right? Because, for example, a Chesapeake Bay oyster being delivered in Philadelphia might come in at 70 cents a piece, and then a beautiful Shikoku that's coming from the West Coast and being shipped out might be $1.40.
Sure.
It's a much different price per piece. So keeping an eye on that, and then educating your staff. The staff needs to know that just because East Coast oysters come in, those are $15 on the menu, and you ran out, or the box is downstairs and you don't feel like running downstairs to grab it, or telling a runner, hey, can you go grab a box of oysters for me? It has a huge impact on the cost of the item, and it might completely throw off your numbers, right?
Sure.
So the team also has to be educated on how the POS data, how the inventory data, how the use of softwares to increase visibility is all part of a huge engine that's incredibly complex.
Of course.
So in general, waste not, want not, right? One of the great new products that we've launched, or services that we've launched at Over Easy Office, is this inventory specialist. So these are team members that are trained in a variety of platforms, from Ctuit, R365, of course, platforms like ChouxBox, MarginEdge, the whole gamut of restaurant technology that's meant to help operators get the most out of their numbers. And these team members dive into your numbers. They reach out, they ask questions. If you buy a new olive oil, for example, they'll check in, right? We noticed that this new Tuscan olive oil is $30 a liter. We definitely are gonna not assume that you're using that to make salad dressing.
Right.
Is that for the crudo?
Right.
Is that for whatever new item? So I'm very proud to say that the Over Easy Office team can really help any operator get the most out of their numbers, their data, their back office, and be proactive in letting the operators know.
What it's really great, what people seem to resonate with the most with that also, is it's a way to normalize your processes over a multi-unit group, right?
My goodness, you're absolutely
It's a small team
right.
working on the inventory versus having
Half
12
the-
different chefs, between 24 different sous chefs, between 18 different purchasing managers, all be on the same page.
And
so we can
you're
put everyone
so
on the same
right.
page for the entire company and do things in a methodical fashion.
I remember there was a restaurant group that I worked in where we used Ctuit, and it was one person's job to constantly train, onboard, and ensure that the operators at the restaurant level had, I guess, the understanding and the execution down to try to get these numbers together, and they were still always wrong. Right? So to your point, that makes all the sense
People
in the
who
world.
are trained to do that kind of work, instead of to be on the floor taking care of your guests, or in the kitchen making sure that everything's being utilized properly and cooked properly, et cetera, the job default to the people who are the best at it.
That's correct. Just imagine you're a 20-unit restaurant group. You've got 80 chefs that are all, working together, getting engaged in creating POS buttons, making sure that your inventory templates are right, updating the pack sizes, and everything else that has to happen to make sure you have clean numbers. And now that goes from 100 people involved in a multitude of invoices and inventory to 1 or 2 or 3 team members on our side from Over Easy Office that can help your team get the most out of the numbers.
That are trained forever. You don't have to worry about people leaving, going on vacation, et cetera, all the crazy things that can happen.
And we all know chefs love to jump around, learn new concepts, learn new recipes. So this is a way, this is an insurance, right? This is a dedicated staff that works with you, whether it's your purchasing managers, your CFO, your controller, to ensure that all these systems that you invest in, like an R365, get the most use out of them.
And static, it remains the same.
And the team members at the operational level and on the top levels of management have the information they need to make informed decisions.
Exactly.